So I've been speaking for the last few Sundays on the subject of trust, asking the questions such as, am I trustworthy? Can God trust me with the resources He's given me? How am I going to trust God? See? How do I go about that? Well, let me read this article that I ran across recently. It was a testimony, really. And the person wrote and said this. He said, at first I saw God as my observer, my judge, keeping track of the things that I did wrong so as to know whether I should go to heaven or hell when I die. That's a pretty familiar way of looking at God. He was sort of out there, you know, sort of like the president. I did recognize his picture when I saw it, but I really didn't know him. Later on, when I met Christ, it seemed as though life were rather like a bicycle ride. It wasn't really, but it was a two-seater bicycle, a tandem bike. Christ was in the back, kind of helping me pedal. You know, I don't know just when it was that he suggested that we change places, but life has never been the same since. When I was in control, when I was steering, I knew the way. It was pretty boring, but it was predictable. It was the shortest distance between 2 points. That's how I steered. But when he took the lead, he knew all kinds of delightful long cuts for us to get where we were supposed to go. We went up mountains and rocky places at breakneck speeds. It was all I could do to hang on. And even though it looked like madness, he said to me, pedal, just pedal. I got worried, I was anxious. And I asked, where are you taking me? And Christ at the front laughed and didn't answer. And that's when I learned I was going to have to trust him. I forgot about my boring life and entered into every adventure. And when I'd say, I'm scared, he'd lean back and touch my hand. He took me to people with gifts that I needed, gifts of healing and gifts of acceptance and gifts of joy. He gave me gifts to take on my journey, and off we would go again. And he would say, give those gifts away. They're extra baggage or too much weight. And so I did, to people we met, and I found that in giving, I received. The journey continued, and our burden was light. I didn't completely trust him at first to take control of my life. I thought he'd wreck it, you know. But he knows bicycle secrets, see. He knows how to make those sharp corners and how to jump clear off the high rocks and do things I could never have done if I were in control. And I'm learning to shut up and pedal in the strangest places. I'm beginning to enjoy the view with my delightful companion, Jesus. And when I'm not sure that I can do it anymore, he smiles and says to me, just pedal. Just keep pedaling. And that really is what he says to us. So I've asked Carrie Abe to come and share her testimony with us right now. Carrie?
Wow, this is nerve-wracking. Even though I'm up here all the time, this is highly personal, so I'm a little nervous, so I had to make some notes, if that's okay. So I've been in this church since I was 2 years old. I was saved when I was 8. I recommitted my life when I was 15. But please don't ever think that that means I have done what I should do and that I have followed God the way that I should. And that's what this is about today. So about 10 years ago, I had a year of Job. So what does that mean? It means I had a multitude of trials hit me all at once, and I had to figure out a way through it. For a time period of my life, I wasn't trusting God with all that I had. I was coming to church. I was participating. I was on this platform. But I wasn't allowing God to permeate my life. I left him on the outside for good appearances. I decided to manage my own life. I was successful. I was a leader at work. I ran a division of over 100 people. I could do this, right? I'm good. I got this. But what I realized was my pride was carrying me. And what I realized is that pride, that's the devil's handiwork. That's not God. So the devil had me thinking that I had it all together. He had me thinking that I was in control. So what did I do? I ignored God. I ignored his prompting. I ignored his little voice so quiet in my head, and I just moved forward with my choices, my desires, with my plan. Well, when I finally came to my senses, because I realized my choices were leading me down a very destructive path, and my choices were extraordinarily unhealthy for me and for those around me, I had this revelation that I wasn't really in control. The devil was in control. And so what I did at that point is I broke down before God. I literally fell to my knees. I begged him for forgiveness and proceeded to continue to ask my family for forgiveness. I had to ask God for his help. I had to dig out of a rather deep hole that I had dug myself. But I can tell you the devil wasn't very happy. I was following a plan that I thought was my own, which was really the devil's plan, and I chose to change that, and I chose to start following God again. The devil let me know that that was not what he had in mind. So slowly, one by one, he started attacking me through my family. So here's the list of events. In January of 2005, my dearest uncle passed away. Then in April, 3 months later, my mother passed away. Many of you knew her. She was the soul of my life. If I talked to her once a day, I talked to her 5 times a day. She took care of my daughter. Then only 2 months later after that, my oldest sister, Dorothy, was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. I really thought this was going to break me at this particular point. I just cried, and then I prayed, and then I cried. 2 months after that, in August, my sister Janet was diagnosed with a very aggressive form of breast cancer. I cried again. I prayed again. Then after that, in September, 1 month later, my aunt, the one who was married to the uncle who passed away in January, fell and hit her head and was no longer able to make medical decisions for herself. And guess who her medical power of attorney was? Me. She lived in Arizona. So now, my mother's estate I was dealing with, both my sisters were in cancer treatment, and I had to start making trips back and forth to Arizona so I could set up care for her. All of this craziness went on for about a year, and it took a toll on everything. But I stayed true to my commitment to God, remembering that God would not give me more than I could handle. I thought maybe he forgot how much I had, but I had to trust him. So then in 2006, as my husband and I were on the verge of divorce, yes, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. So then, it's Christmas 2006. Let's recap. I have no uncle. I have no mom. Both my sisters are in chemo. My aunt's in a dementia facility. My marriage is in shambles. And I have a cancerous lump in my neck. What was I going to do? I can tell you part of me wanted to say, Lord, why me? But I knew why me. I knew how my life had been prior to that. So I just prayed continuously, daily, hourly, in the car, in the shower, before I went to bed, when I woke up, if I was cooking, if I was washing different dishes, anywhere, everywhere, I was praying. If I was sitting silent, don't think I wasn't talking in my head to God, because I needed him close. This was my darkest hour. I felt so alone, and I needed him there. I needed to know there was some safe place to fall at this particular point. So after quite a while of doing that, slowly, God did start to return my life back to me. My husband and I reconciled, and we have celebrated 20 years last year. I've been cancer-free for 8 years. Dorothy lived another 5 years. We did eventually lose her, but we got 5 more. Janet has fully recovered. We have a much closer relationship, and she comes to church with me. And I'm so thankful for my wonderful family, my beautiful daughter, and my very gracious husband. And I'm just thankful that the Lord didn't forsake me in my darkest hour, even though I had forsaken him. So the lesson to learn there is, no matter what you think your plan is, God's plan is so much better than what you can even imagine. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Every one of us comes to a place where we ask a very simple question. Can I really trust God? Really? And is he really paying attention? Now, for those who have been raised in the church, some church, we go through a period of time, it seems, where we say, well, I'm going to just do what I want to do internally, and outwardly I'll just be like everybody else. And that I can think what I want to think and do what I want to do. And yet we cannot get away with it. See? Can I trust God with my life or my family or my job or my health? Can I trust God with my stuff, my money, my 401k, my, quantitative easing? Can I trust God with any of this? So every one of us has to come to a place, and does come to a place, where we either say, we cross the line, and we either say, yes, I do trust him, or we stay back and say no, and just continue on the downward spiral. And it's at this line where we ask this question, this very trust line, that we move on to grow spiritually by crossing it and saying, yes, I'm going to trust God, or we back away from that line and our souls begin to shrivel, and we never do reach our potential as a child of God. All because we are unwilling to let God take control of our lives. I'm trying to give you some handles here. Ways that you and I can get a grip on learning to trust God more completely in our lives. We need it. You need it. I need it. See? So I have a little acrostic here because it is what preachers do. All right, I have a little acrostic. And let me share with you what each letter stands for. The T in trust stands for take inventory. Take inventory. We need to be asking ourselves bottom line questions. Do I really trust God? I'm going to come back to these in a minute. The R stands for recognize God as your source. As your source. We need to realize that as we inventory our lives, that everything that you and I have right now, everything, we have received from God. All of it. You may say, well, I'd like a little better class of stuff from God. But you're probably not going to get that until you show him what you can do with what you've got. You know. It was like when I had my first job. And I wasn't doing very good. I was kind of a lazy kid. I would love to tell you I was an ongoing success story from my adolescence, but it's not true. See? And I was getting about $1.25 an hour, you know, and they'd say, well, you need to work a little harder. And I'd say, well, if you paid me more, I'd work harder. Yeah, it may have been an excuse you've used in your life, but it's never true. See, it's never true. As it was, at $1.25, I was getting about 3 times what I was worth. No doubt about it. R stands for recognize God as your source. The U stands for this. It stands for understand God's principles. Understand God's principles for your life. Until we understand God's principles, we're always going to hold back in our trust toward God because we don't know how it works. And we haven't been informed or we haven't paid attention. And so we say, well, I don't get it. The S in trust is for surrender. Surrender everything to God. The moment we understand the principles God has for us, then it's just an act of surrender. Give it to Him. Give it to Him. And the T stands for test. Test God's promises. God Himself tells us this in His Word. He says, test me in this and see if I don't do as I say I'm going to do. He says you can try it out. You can check it out. Test me in this. So we need to look at God's words and we need to test His promises because it's in that testing of God's promises that God proves Himself to us. That's how we find out. And all of a sudden, when we test His promises and we see that His word is true, then it comes to us that all of a sudden our faith begins to build. We begin to believe. So we're going to look more deeply into these things. T-R-U-S-T. We're going to look into these. Let's go back to T at the beginning. T, take an inventory. The writer in the book of Psalms says it better than anybody that I could. He asks God, he says to God, God, look deep in my heart and find out everything I'm thinking. He asks God to do that. That is not how we have a tendency to approach these things. Usually what we do is, I hope God doesn't see that. That's usually what our approach is. But the psalmist said, look deep within my heart. Tell me, find out everything I'm thinking. Don't let me follow evil ways, the writer said, but lead me in the way that time has proven true. Let's read this, okay? Here we go. Read it with me, this first one. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. Point out anything in me that offends you, and lead me along the path of everlasting life. Psalms 139, 23, and 24. Search me. Lead me. Well, three things about this passage of Scripture I want to point out to you, okay? Number one, only God knows everything about us. Or I could put it another way. Only God knows everything about you, just as He knows everything about me. And the psalmist is writing, he said, look deep into my heart and find out everything I'm thinking. You say, well, you're thinking it, you should know it. No. We hide stuff from ourselves all the time. All the time, see? I don't even know what's down there. I don't even know what I'm thinking. Look deep within my heart. Tell me what's going on down there. I need to know. He's asking God, this writer in the book of Psalms, he's asking God to help him take a personal inventory. For instance, why are you angry all the time? Or why do you get angry periodically, seemingly for no reason? Why do you suddenly blow up? There's a reason in there. You probably don't know the reason, or haven't thought about it, or don't want to think about it. You may have a lot of rationalizations, but you need to ask God, take an inventory in my heart, find out what the problem is. Tell me. You want to know. Number two about this verse here. Only God can lead me correctly. Only God can lead me correctly. The psalm writer recognizes here that our tendency is to want to follow selfish, evil ways. Yes, it is. That is our tendency. We are born into a fallen world. We are fallen people. We learn it from the moment of our birth. So he says to him, ask God, Lead me correctly, because I have a personal tendency toward selfishness. All that goes wrong in this world, you can trace it back to selfishness, whether it's war, whatever it is, crime, anger, secrets. It's all about selfishness. And the psalm writer is saying here, I want you to show me this. Show me this. Number 3 of these observations. Taking inventory and trusting God begins with me. Begins with me. Did you get that, or are you too distracted by the baby? Begins with me. Yeah. This whole issue begins with me, the whole thing. I have to do a personal inventory, and I need to ask myself the question, how am I doing? How am I doing in this whole thing, in this area of trust? Do I trust God, or do I really only trust my being able to control and manipulate the situation? Let's look at Proverbs, the 3rd chapter. And let me show you how personal this inventory has to be. Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6. And I want you, as you look at this, because I think you have it there in your outline, I want you to circle the personal pronouns. You know what personal pronouns are? You, your. It's when they're speaking directly to us personally. Okay? So here it is. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Seek His will in all you do, and He will show you which path to take. I don't know whether you are to this point or not in your own life, but one of the areas that I find that I have had problems with, and still do on occasion, is in the area of making decisions. Should I do this? Should I do that? Or should I do this or this or this or this or this? Or do that? Does this sound familiar to anybody? You know, are you with me here? Yeah. He is telling us here in the writing to the Proverbs here, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding, which isn't that great. Seek His will in all you do, and He will show you which path to take. He says, if you seek me, I will let you know what you ought to do. Verse 7. Don't be impressed with your own wisdom. Instead, fear the Lord and turn away from evil. Fear means to respect the Lord, honor the Lord. Okay? Then you, here, listen to this. Then you will have healing for your body and strength for your bones. Well, we are getting to an age where we want all of that. We want the healing, we want the strength. We'd like to be able to get up without staggering all the time. Yeah, you're pretending like you don't know what I'm talking about. He says in verse 9, honor the Lord with your wealth and with the best part of everything you produce. Then He will fill your barns with grain, and your vats will overflow with good wine. Indicating clearly that nobody wants bad wine. So He promises you good wine. It's a metaphorical application. What does it say in these verses? It says this is all about you. He is telling you how you, personally, where you are, can receive the benefits and the blessings from your Creator. He gives us simple steps on how to do this. This is not rocket science. Don't think that you have all the answers, he says. Well, you don't need further evidence to know that's true. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. See? Seek His will in all you do, and He will show you which path to take. As we heard Carrie's testimony, it was when she finally reached the point where she realized that she did not have all the answers and she could not manipulate all the circumstances, and she finally was driven to her knees, that the difference began to take place within her life. See, it is about you. It's always about you. Number 2, the R, was recognize God as your source. Well, I pull up to the intersection. I'm waiting for a left turn signal. There is a person standing there on the island with a sign which says, hungry, homeless, will work for food. And basically what that individual is doing is saying, you look like you could be my source, you see, as I sit there. He is not discriminating. He thinks anybody that drives by there could be his source. And I nearly always give him something. I am a source, but I'm not a source of much. See? But the difference is that we go along most of the time in our lives, and we have that same sign up saying, you know, everybody else is my source. And really the victory comes, the power comes when we recognize that God is really our source, that everything we have is basically a gift from God. It says in Deuteronomy, the 8th chapter, the 17th and 18th verses. Read this with me. If you start thinking to yourselves, I did all this all by myself, I'm rich, it's all mine, well, think again, it says. Remember that God, your God, gave you the strength to produce all this wealth so as to confirm the covenant that he promised to your ancestors as it is today. Well, you may have a hard time kind of identifying with that phrase, all this wealth, in terms of what you've got. But the fact of the matter is, he's telling us as clearly as he can that God is our source. And what we do receive, what we do have, we have received from him. So we were talking a little earlier about God's principles. This is number 3. Understand God's principles. Now, there's 3 reasons why Christians or church people, you know, us, there's 3 reasons why we don't give more to God. First reason is that people oftentimes, they don't think that they can give and meet their own needs. They haven't got enough. See? Once they get everything paid, then there'll be some left over. I want to tell you right now, that devil will see that you never have anything left over. Just will. Most of the time when we start talking about resources and finances, we find people saying such things. I can't spare it. I can't give till I take care of my family, the rent, the mortgage, I got to pay the bills, on and on and on. That's usually our litany for that kind of situation. The idea of just giving something to God without having control of everything else terrifies people. It just frightens them, you know. Second reason is people don't know how to give. Just don't know how to do it. Haven't been around very much, don't know how. Third reason is this. They don't plan to give, see. So everything in their life is an emergency. Oh yeah, we're getting closer to the bone, aren't we? They don't plan to give. And so consequently, every situation that comes along every day, it's a new emergency in their life. Gotta happen now, gotta do it. You see, you need to attend some kind of personal financial seminar. We had one here a couple years ago. Dave Ramsey, it was great. Some of you got testimonies about that. But you need to know how to deal with this area of your money. It's an important part of your life. How do we know it's an important part of your life? Because you think about it all the time. You need to get on top of it. Number 4, stewardship principles that make a difference. You know, we talked about stewardship last week and for the last couple of weeks. What is the definition of it? Stewardship, the definition is that we let Jesus Christ manage our lives for us instead of us constantly trying to do it. And here are some of the principles that go on. Number 1, okay? There's the who's in charge principle. Psalms 24:1. Let's understand how this works in this life. God owns everything that I have. Everything. He owns it all. You think you've got it paid off? No, you paid it off for him. See? So God is the owner. I am the manager. He gives me that privilege. Basically, the question is, who's going to run my life? If you choose God to run your life, then that's what we call Christ management. That's what we call stewardship. We let him run our lives. We face decisions, financial decisions, circumstances. What do? We don't try to figure it out. We go to God in prayer. And he tells us and directs us. It says in Psalms 24:1, it says, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. I don't see anything that's outside that. It includes it all. The second of the principles is this. It's the give and grow principle. Practicing stewardship, practicing God's plan produces growth in your life. This is a great quote. It's a testimony, really, from a man named G. Timothy Johnson. Let me just read it to you. He says, some say dedicate the heart and the money will follow. But our Lord put it the other way around. He said, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. If your treasure is dedicated, your heart will be dedicated. If it is not, it simply won't be. It's as simple as that. So what have you dedicated in your own heart, in your own life? There's the do it now principle. Because our stewardship, our management of our resources in God's economy deals with our present resources, what we have now. Samuel Johnson said this, I love this. He said, the person who waits to do a great deal of good at once will never do anything. You know that's true, don't you? One of these days, I'm going to do these wonderful things for charity, for the church, for the kingdom, for God. One of these days. But in the meantime, nothing happens. Nothing. This little poem I read a long time ago, I've quoted it before, says, procrastination. You know what procrastination is, don't you? You know that? Procrastination is my greatest sin. It brings me endless sorrow. I'm going to stop doing it. Perhaps I'll start tomorrow. Yeah, putting it off. Here's the question, and I'm going to ask it to you. How long are you going to wait before you get serious about your spiritual health? How long? See? How long are you going to wait before you finally, before you learn how to study the Bible and have a regular daily quiet time in the Lord's presence? How long are you going to wait before you do that? What are your spiritual habits? What are your spiritual gifts that you have? Do you know? Are you using all of them or any of them, of the resources that God has given you? Are you doing any of that? What are you doing with your present resources now? I know all about your intentions. They're the same as mine were. If I had just won the lottery last week, I would have given all the money to the church. No, you wouldn't. See? No, you wouldn't. You don't return to God a tithe even now. What do you mean you're going to suddenly give 100%? It isn't going to happen. No. I hear Christians all the time, and they say these things. They're kind of cliches almost. They say, God will provide. See, they keep saying it. God will provide. Let me tell you something. God already has provided. He already has provided for us. See? The issue is not God's provisions. The issue is for you and I to learn to manage the resources He's given to us, to be a good steward of His, and to pass them on. Next of God's principles, the I'm in debt principle. I'm in debt. It's from Romans, the first chapter, in the 14th and 15th verses. It says this: I owe a great deal to you and everyone else, Paul said. He admitted that he was in debt. But we have this quote from Albert Schweitzer. You know who Albert Schweitzer was? Have we lived beyond him? You know, he was a very brilliant man, a musician. He went off to Africa, stayed down there, made a hospital for the natives. Albert Schweitzer said this. He said, whatever you have received more than others in health or in talents, in ability or in success, all this you must not take to yourself as a matter of course. He said, in gratitude, you need to render some sacrifices of your own life for another life. We are always living under the obligation of returning what we have received. Paul understood he was a debtor. He understood that he was indebted to God, and he was also indebted to those people in those churches. He said, every good and perfect gift comes from Him. We are all indebted to God. And here's something that I know many of you have been looking for, probably haven't found yet. It's number 5, and it is the fountain of youth principle. Fountain of youth principle. It is the truth that we live forever through our giving. Douglas M. Lawson, he's a writer, but he said this. He said, we exist temporarily through what we take, but we live forever through what we give. Always we live forever through what we give. Jesus said to us, what we keep, we lose, and what we lose, we keep. What we give, we keep. We all know the expression, you can't take it with you. Have you heard that? Mm-hmm. But as we have the promises of God's Word, we know this. We know that you can send it on ahead. See? And that's what His promises teach us. So, the key to successful living, stewardship of your life, getting a balance in the resources that you have. What is that? How do you do that? It's a matter of trust. It's a matter of trust.